I get a lot of questions whenever I come through and I talk to CISOs and I talk to organizations about the metrics that they have, the dashboards that they have looking at data. And it's a interesting conversation because a lot of times they pull out data that is otherwise not useful. They don't make any decisions off of it. They have numbers, but it's not really numbers that tell them anything that can be turned into action. And that becomes a problem because a lot of what we do in the security industry is we take actions to help mitigate risk. So if we're not pulling data correctly and displaying it in a way that is useful to us, then that is a problem. Now, a couple episodes ago, we were talking about micro logs and learning how to pull data from very basic things such as a firewall, and I was using an LLM to help me create the bash shell to give me data, but everything that we pulled out of that truly was actionable data. And again, that was at a micro level. And today, or this evening, I really want to talk about that macro level. What are those broad things that you need to think about? And metrics are it's really hard. In the business school back many years ago when I was much younger, we talked about things from a management perspective. Specifically, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Well, I took that with me to being a CISO. If I can't measure the issues, then there's really no way for me to manage it. How do I know that something good or is bad? I remember years ago, I had a CIO who wanted the number of attacks that was coming in our system, and there wasn't a really good way to tell how many attacks were coming into our firewall. So I pulled some numbers, and they were obnoxious. I mean, they were millions of attacks per hour, and he was happy with that, and I never was. I never liked that. And when I started presenting this information to the board, I never used those measures. So I worked hard to try to find some good measures and metrics that showed what I was doing in security, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Is what are the metrics? What are the decisions you need to make within the security environment, and then how do you ask the questions to help you make that decision? When you do that, then your dashboards become really useful for decision making, and so that's what we're going to cover tonight. And you know, the dashboards that we have, a CISO dashboard is very different than a leadership dashboard. So a CISO dashboard is to help you make decisions. So when you look up, you might see a number that tells you something is either increasing or decreasing, and therefore you're seeing an ebb and flow in something. It might be a number that you want to change. You want to make it less or you want to make it more. But this is real-time information, and it helps you make that decision. Now, for leadership dashboards, these are a little different. A leadership dashboard or a metrics that you're going to provide to leadership is really, it's built for understanding over time, how things go up and down, if you're at a peak time or at a lull time, or how things have grown or how things have changed. And it's really to help leadership decide or help them support you, whether it be funding or resources or tools or whatever you need at the time. So you got to keep that in mind. The CISO dashboard and a leadership dashboard are really two different things. Now, you understand that when we're doing a CISO dashboard, some of the things that we care about is, well, what is exposure? What can hurt us right now? And this may be like a vulnerability that you have open right now, or a port open on the external firewall, or an undeployed patch, something like that. The next piece would be detection. How many scans are happening on your network? How many scans are happening on an internal network, on a private VLAN, or whatever it is? those are things that, your exposure and detection are things that you can very quickly make actionable decisions on. The next one is response, and this takes a little bit longer to gather, and this comes out of call tracking. Is how fast is your average time for a ticket in terms of tickets coming into security and things that you need to look at and respond to, and then things like resilience. Can we survive something if it fails? How are backups going? What's our recovery time objectives and that we've tested? How long does it take us to actually bring something back up? Do we even know what our critical functions are? Do we know how many critical functions and critical services and critical servers that support those services that we have? It's really interesting when I come into organizations and we start talking about what are your critical functions. I can ask IT, what are your critical servers? Sometimes they say everything. Sometimes they say, well, this, and this. But when I go and talk to the teams, the stakeholders out in the departments, they give me a much different answer. Now, those answers actually have critical services that support those functions, and then of course the critical servers that support those services. And there are times things may be super critical for the in terms of functionality of the organization that IT knows nothing about. So having a good understanding of what is critical and what is critical functions, critical services, and critical servers, that's really important to know. Now we can all say, and I hear it a lot, everything is critical. We got to have everything is critical. Well, if that is the case, you're spending a whole heck of a lot of money making sure that you've got zero downtime, full redundancy, full hot environment. So you need to be kind of critical in terms of what you're doing and what is critical and what isn't. I like starting at that critical function and then working my way back. So I tried to come up with some really good questions to help my clients. And these questions are, what is it that you could make a decision on right now? And that you don't really need to have any additional tools or resources to be able to do this. And the first one that gets a lot of organizations is patch management. Do you have a report that tells you how many of your machines have not been patched in your 30 days? Now, this would come right out of basic patch management. You can get this out of a WSUS server or a variety of other tools. In fact, a lot of your EDRs like CrowdStrike and such will tell you this. So you should have a way, whether it's a metrics that you can pull out and put in a dashboard, or even just a report that you go in and pull on a regular basis. You should be looking to see how many systems have not been patched in the last 30 days. So if there's a patch that's been out there and you have a patch management requirement of 30 days or 2 weeks or whatever, you need to have that running report to know exactly where you're at. Now, what if you have a significant number of machines that are unpatched? Well, that's actionable data. Go patch them. And I know that's funny, and I say it in jest in that way, but it's the truth. Sometimes you just need to go patch them. And I get a lot of pushback on this, that the tools are broken or this or that. I have patched many things by hand. I used to have to update computer labs, hundreds of machines by hand, because our tools were broken or whatever. So if you pull a report and you see you have a high number of machines that are unpatched, that specifically is a vulnerability. That is a vulnerability that you have the ability to fix, because you could just go and patch the machines. So if you have high numbers of those vulnerabilities, high numbers of unpatched machines, that would be a prioritization issue. You need to prioritize the patching of those machines. If your machines aren't patched, a lot of your other controls just don't work. So that's something to think about. Now, here's another one. Here's another one that we're talking about in terms of critical fundamental security controls. And this would be, how many users don't have MFA? It is still amazing how many organizations have a significant number of users that do not have MFA enabled. Now, this is something that you can generally pull off of Microsoft, or if you've got something like a Duo or any of those tools, you could go and just pull this report. Maybe it's a once a week report. Maybe it's a once a month report that comes along that same time that you get those patch management reports. But it is an important number, because if you have a significant number of accounts that do not have MFA, those machines or those accounts or could be compromised pretty easily. I find user accounts all the time up on things like Dhashed and a variety, Leak Peek, and a few other things that we look at, and those passwords are out there. And MFA is really the only thing that's preventing somebody from using that password from getting into that account. So that would be a high risk, easy action question that I would want to have a report for, or have this as a metrics, is how many accounts don't have MFA. And I'll tell you, the checking this periodically is important because it changes. We have a lot of organizations that turning MFA on and off, it happens a lot. So that's why it's important to have that regular report to keep track of that. Now, if you don't have MFA right now, you're playing with fire. You really need to get MFA turned on and on your users. It's standard now. It's standard industry practice is to have MFA. Now, speaking of user accounts, another question that I like asking within the organization is, how many user accounts are not being used? Now, this could be a terminated user account. It could be an account that's gone into a dormant state. Somebody is just not here anymore. Higher eds have this problem a lot. The users leave and the account becomes a zombie account. So having a query, I use a tool called AD Tidy, and I know a lot of people make fun of that tool, but it's a great tool. I've used it for many, many years, and it gives me a quick report of how many users haven't logged into the system in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, whatever the number is appropriate in your organization. Then you need to figure out how to check that and then how to deal with that. Now, it could be that you don't have an offboarding process that is working correctly. You need to compare it with what HR has or whoever's managing your accounts. If you have a lot of accounts out there that are not disabled, even though those people are no longer there, then there's a problem. Again, it's actionable. It's you see the report, you make a determination of what's your threshold, and then if it goes over that threshold, then you start calling people, HR or whoever, to figure out, okay, why do we have these zombie accounts? Not hard. It doesn't take any additional tools. AD Tidy is free. And again, it's not a perfect tool, and there's a lot of other tools out there that do the same thing, and you can do the same thing with a PowerShell script. But it's about getting the data and looking at it. Another one that is near and dear to my heart, and that is vendors who have access to your data. Many, many times we come in during an IR and we ask people what vendors have access to this, and they don't know. What contracts do you have that control this access? They don't know. So you really need to have you need to go and ask questions. Now, in this particular metrics, just having a number of people that you have data going to, that's an important number to know. We would get, in my old job, we would get requests almost daily to have access to our students. And you have to control that some way. Because every time you give data to a third party, you've got third party risk. You got to deal with that vendor management side. Make sure you have your contracts. Make sure you have your privacy agreements, your data use agreements. You got to make sure it gets signed off on by all your stakeholders and whoever needs to have access to that. So just having an understanding of how many people have access to your data outside, third-party vendors, that is incredibly important. And again, it's actionable data. If you see that number go up and you don't know how that went up, you don't know that if you don't know why it went up, say you had 17 and then all of a sudden you had 19 and you didn't monitor any new contracts coming through, that could be a problem. And that could be an easy problem to go fix. You go and you find out who were the extra two vendors and then who are the stakeholders, and then go talk to them and get a copy of the contracts and figure out if it got approved, all these different things. But again, simple question, a simple report, though it may take some time to gather, and then a simple action to fix the problem. Another one that I really like using, and I do this a lot for my audits, is how many systems are not covered by endpoint protection. So if you do here's a simple report. Let's pull your computer objects right out of Active Directory, again with something like AD-Tidy or PowerShell script or whatever, and then pull the number of devices you have out of your CrowdStrike console. They should be pretty similar. Now, neither one of them will give you all the devices on your network, because you're going to have network switches and access points and a whole variety of things. But you should at least have your EDR on every single machine that you own. So you need to compare it to something hopefully your hardware inventory. But if you don't know that, or if you don't have one, well, pull out the computer objects out of your AD and at least start there. If you have 10,000 computer objects in AD and you only have 5,000 in your CrowdStrike console, that's a problem. That is a huge problem, and that's something that you want to fix. Either clean up your Active Directory, clean up the number of devices that you have as a whole that you know about, and if they don't have EDR on them, then you need to go and find that. And again, you're not buying any additional tool. You have CrowdStrike, you have support of EDR. You need to make sure that EDR is out there on those machines. Thinking about things like threat intel, and not really threat intel, but this is alerts. So let's talk about your SIEM or your CrowdStrike or your firewall or any of that. You want to look to see if you have any alerts. What are the alerts that have come in? Do you have any alerts that have not been reviewed in the last 7 days? I've got some tabletops that deal with this sort of thing. If an alert comes in on the firewall, how long will it take for someone to look at it? In some organizations, it's in minutes. Some organizations, it's days. Some said they would never see it. So you need to have a good understanding of what is the time of completion or a time of resolution for an alert comes into your tracking system, whatever that may be, whether it's a CrowdStrike or a SIEM or even some of the Microsoft tools, from the time that it gets reviewed and gets closed. If that averages, let's say 7 days, 10 days, 15 days, 3 days, that's something to know. Let's say that number goes up unexpectedly. So you have things, your average time goes up to 15 days. So that's 15 days of dwell time that an attacker may be doing something on your network. That's super critical to understand. If you do see that change, or if you have alerts that are going unresolved, you have a visibility problem or maybe a resource problem. Either way, you've got a problem that you need to deal with, again, because those alerts may be telling you there's a problem on your network. So you don't want to let those go too long. We talked about earlier, I'm just thinking about other questions. We talked about earlier that critical functions, how resilient you are. But in some cases, just having the number of critical systems and critical functions is important. If you don't know what those are and having that number for that, it's you may not be able to deploy the correct resources to something. I was doing a tabletop one day, and we were talking to a department that was as part of the tabletop, and they said, well, yeah, if this stuff goes down, people could die. And I know that's a big part of a lot of tabletops, but this was serious. And they were like, I asked IT, it's like, well, what do you have to deal with that situation? They're like, we don't have anything. We didn't know that was a problem. So that could be problematic if you don't know things that could cause an immediate business disruption. if it were to go down, that's an issue. Now, what I used years ago was a program called PRTG. It's fairly widely known, and SolarWinds is similar, but it's monitoring certain services that if they're up or they're down, red and green. And if they were red, somebody better be checking on them to figure out why they're red and what are we going to have to do to fix it. So these are things that are easy to deploy. And this is actually PRTG was one of the first ones that I used for dashboards and metrics that I posted in IT officers' website or TVs in their offices. And that was to get them to realize when things were up and down. And I'll tell you, when things turned red, they were immediately walking down the hallway to their teams, figuring out, okay, why is it red? Is it a network problem? Is it the server problem? Is it a workstation problem? Why is it red? Red means bad in the case of how you set these alerts up. So those are critical, and those are easy to have up on a screen. Of course, I've got screens everywhere, but I started that years ago just to make sure people were aware of, here's the number of systems, and if they're down, we have a problem. The last one I really want to cover is your external footprint. If you've got a lot of IPs or a lot of machines or services that are available to the internet, those are being attacked, just flat out. So you should have, of course, the minimum amount available to the internet, but you need to make sure that you know what those are and if those numbers change. And if they change, you need to know why they changed. Maybe a new service went out. Maybe a new server went up. Whatever it is, it may have a legitimate reason, but it could be that a firewall rule got taken down and now opened things up. Now, you can do this a couple different ways. As a CISO, what I used to do is just regular scanning of our network from the outside to see what was available and what wasn't. I also would use tools like Shodan and a whole variety of tools. And what I would want to know is I would find the right queries to deploy with one of the APIs or another tool, and I would run it periodically to see if anything changed. It's really no different than going up into dhash. There we go. I get the right one soon. Dhash and look to see how many at domain emails were available. And if that number went up suddenly, then I would know that a new breach had gotten out, and I'm going to have to go and research those. So knowing what your external surface is, your attack surface, is critical. You, as a CISO, as a security professional, you should know exactly how many external systems you have. You need to know exactly which ports are available. You should be running that report. I would do it, well, at least weekly, if not daily. I would have an Nmap query just sitting there running, and I'd have to do it from the outside, so I would bounce it off something and come back. But you need to know what those resources are. You need to know what's available out there because, again, they are being attacked. So let's review those 8, because those 8 are actually a pretty incredible starting point for your dashboard, your metrics. So number 1, I'll review them again. How many systems do you have that have not been patched in 30 days? How many users do you have that do not have MFA? How many terminated users or zombie accounts or disabled users that you have on your system? How many vendors do you have that have access to your data? How many systems are not covered by endpoint protection? How many critical alerts have gone unreviewed in the last X amount of days, 3 days, 7 days, 10 days, whatever is appropriate for you? How many systems do you have that would cause an immediate disruption if they went down? And then how many externally exposed systems do you have, and what are they? Now, those are 8 questions. Now, I'll tell you, if you do those 8 reports and you have those available to you on a regular basis, if you can put them together in a digital display like this with a Raspberry Pi or whatever, that would be fantastic. If you have it on a web page somewhere that only you have access to or your team has access to, that would be great. Even if you have you pull these reports once a week, once a month, and you look at this, you're going to figure out very quickly where problems are in your environment, and you're going to very quickly know how you can fix it. So, metrics are important. Management is important. Really, information is what is important. As a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, us having good information allows us to make better decisions. Us having good information allows us to be actionable in our decision. So keep that in mind. If these 8 questions aren't something that would be useful to you, great. Go find you 8 questions that you can answer and that helps you make good decisions in your organization. And I think it'll help you very quickly help mitigate a lot of the risks within your organization. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.